There are people you notice because they are loud, others because they are brilliant. And then there are those rare individuals who leave an impression without ever asking for your attention. Looking back, I sometimes wonder whether that was Adrian's greatest talent. He never tried to become the center of the room. The room simply rearranged itself around him. When I accepted a position as a software engineer at one of London's largest technology firms, I believed I was finally stepping into the life I had spent years chasing. I was 27, carrying 2 suitcases into a tiny flat in Shoreditch, and far more expectations than I cared to admit. The company occupied the upper floors of a modern glass tower overlooking the Thames. Everything inside reflected quiet success. Open workspaces flooded with natural light, polished oak desks, walls decorated with minimalist artwork, and people who spoke with calm confidence, as though deadlines were merely gentle suggestions. Compared to them, I felt painfully ordinary. On my first morning, I stood in reception, adjusting the knot of a tie I'd watched 3 different tutorials to learn. My palms were damp despite the December cold outside. New starter. The voice was warm enough to cut through my anxiety. I turned. The man standing behind me appeared to be in his early 30s. He wore a charcoal gray suit tailored so perfectly it seemed effortless. His dark hair was neatly combed, and a pair of intelligent blue eyes rested on me with genuine curiosity rather than judgment. He smiled. Not the exaggerated smile people wear to appear friendly. A quiet one, the kind that immediately convinces you everything will be all right. "I'm Adrian." He extended his hand. "You must be Ryan." I shook it. I didn't realize everyone already knew my name. Adrian chuckled softly. "They always remember new faces. Give it a week and they'll forget you've ever been nervous." Something about his voice settled me instantly. He guided me through the office without making it feel like an official tour. Instead, it felt as though an old friend was introducing me to a place where I had always belonged. He knew everyone, not just their names, their stories. He greeted the receptionist by asking about her mother's surgery. He congratulated one developer on finishing a marathon. He reminded someone else not to forget an anniversary dinner that evening. Every conversation lasted only a few seconds, yet each person smiled after speaking with him. It fascinated me. By lunchtime, I had already heard the same sentence repeated at least 5 times. "If you need anything, ask Adrian. Adrian always knows." Nobody takes better care of this place than Adrian. One woman from Human Resources laughed while pouring herself coffee. "We call him the gentleman." The nickname suited him perfectly. He carried himself with old-fashioned courtesy that felt strangely rare in a modern office. He held doors open without thinking. He remembered birthdays without checking calendars. He somehow knew everyone's preferred coffee before they ordered it. When I accidentally sent an unfinished report to the wrong department that afternoon, I expected embarrassment. Instead, Adrian quietly appeared beside my desk. "No problem," he whispered. "I've already asked them to ignore it." "You did," he smiled. "I noticed before your manager did." Relief flooded through me. "Thank you. We all needed someone during our first week." His kindness felt effortless, natural. Too natural, perhaps. Over the following days, I began noticing something unusual. Adrian never seemed surprised. If someone called in sick, he already knew. If a meeting changed rooms, he arrived before everyone else. If 2 colleagues had argued privately, Adrian somehow managed to calm both of them before rumors had time to spread. People admired his intuition. I admired it too. At first, one rainy Tuesday, I wandered into the staff kitchen hoping for 5 quiet minutes before another afternoon of endless meetings. Adrian was already there. He placed a ceramic mug in front of me before I even spoke. "Flat white," he said. "No sugar." I stared at the cup. "I've never had coffee with you." "You haven't? Then, how did you know?" His smile remained perfectly calm. "You looked like someone who drinks flat whites." I laughed. "That's a lucky guess. Perhaps." But something in the way he answered lingered with me. Not because it frightened me, because it was too precise. A week later, I decided to eat lunch somewhere different. I deliberately walked nearly 15 minutes away from the office to a small Italian cafe hidden between 2 old brick buildings. The place was quiet. Hardly anyone from work even knew it existed. I had just stepped inside when a familiar voice greeted me. "Ryan." I turned. Adrian sat alone by the window with a plate of pasta and a newspaper folded neatly beside him. He smiled as though our meeting had been the most ordinary coincidence in the world. What a pleasant surprise. I forced a smile in return and joined him. Outside rain slid slowly down the cafe windows, blurring the streets of London into soft gray watercolors. We spoke about work, football, books, nothing unusual, nothing suspicious. And yet, for reasons I couldn't explain, I left lunch feeling strangely unsettled. Not because Adrian had done anything wrong, because he never seemed to be anywhere by accident. Every encounter felt expected, as though he had known I would arrive long before I did. I told myself I was imagining things. After all, everyone loved Adrian. Everyone trusted Adrian. Everyone believed the gentleman was the kindest soul in the entire building. Everyone, except a small voice somewhere deep inside me that had only just begun to whisper, "Be careful." By the end of my second week, Adrian had become part of my routine. That was how it happened, I think. Not suddenly, not violently, but quietly, the way fog moves through old London streets until every familiar corner becomes strange. Each morning, I would step out of the lift and see him already at his desk, immaculate as ever, his jacket hanging neatly behind him and a cup of coffee resting beside his keyboard. He always looked as though he had been there for hours, though no one seemed to know when he actually arrived. "Morning, Ryan," he would say, without looking up, and somehow that greeting made the office feel less hostile. I hated that. I hated how quickly comfort could become dependence. The company itself encouraged closeness. Open desks, glass meeting rooms, shared kitchens, Friday drinks, team lunches, little rituals designed to make strangers feel like family. Everyone spoke about culture as if it were something sacred, and at the center of that culture stood Adrian, the gentleman. He remembered everything. When Sarah from design came in with red eyes, Adrian quietly canceled her afternoon meeting before she asked. When Thomas forgot an important client file, Adrian had already printed a backup copy. When one of the interns spilled coffee over his laptop, Adrian appeared with a towel, a replacement machine, and a joke, gentle enough to save the boy from embarrassment. People did not merely like him. They trusted him with the softest parts of themselves. I watched it happen every day. I watched colleagues hand him secrets wrapped in casual conversation. A sick parent, a failing marriage, a fear of being fired, a medication left in a desk drawer. Adrian listened beautifully. He never interrupted. He never judged. He tilted his head slightly, softened his eyes, and made people feel as though for a few sacred minutes they were the only person in the world. Perhaps that was why he frightened me, because when he listened to me, I felt it too. One evening, after a difficult code review, I stayed behind later than planned. Most of the office lights had dimmed automatically, leaving only the soft glow above my row of desks. London stretched beyond the windows in layers of gold, black, and rain. I thought I was alone. Then, Adrian spoke from behind me. "You take criticism very personally." I turned so quickly my chair rolled back. He stood near the conference room, hands in his pockets, calm and elegant in the half-dark. "I didn't hear you come in. I didn't mean to startle you." His voice was gentle, too gentle. I forced a laugh. "Do I take criticism personally?" "Yes." He came closer, stopping at the edge of my desk. "You pretend not to, but your jaw tightens and you stop blinking for a moment." I stared at him. It was such a small observation, intimate, in a way that felt almost indecent. "I suppose I just want to do well," I said. "You will." He smiled. "You're more afraid of disappointing people than failing." The words struck somewhere deep. For a second, I could not answer, because he was right, and I hated that he was right. "How do you know that?" I asked. Adrian's smile did not fade. People are easier to understand than they think. After he left, the office seemed colder. I packed my things with a strange tightness in my chest and went home through the rain. I tried to convince myself he was simply perceptive. Some people were gifted that way. Some people noticed details others missed. But perception has a limit. At least it should. The next morning I arrived early on purpose. 7:30. The lobby was almost empty, the marble floor still shining from the cleaner's machines. I wanted foolishly, perhaps, to beat Adrian to the office, to prove he was not always already there. The lift doors opened on the 23rd floor. Adrian stood by the windows, looking out over the waking city. He did not turn immediately. "Couldn't sleep?" he asked. My fingers tightened around my bag strap. "No, just wanted an early start." Of course. Only then did he look at me. His expression was pleasant, ordinary, but behind him, reflected faintly in the glass, I saw my own face. Pale, uncertain, watched. That afternoon, I changed my routine again. Without telling anyone, I left through the rear exit instead of the main lobby. I walked 3 blocks in the opposite direction from my usual station, crossed through a narrow street behind an old church, and took a different underground line home. It was childish. I knew that, but I needed to feel alone inside my own life. For the first 10 minutes I did. The train carriage was nearly empty. Rain tapped softly against the dark windows as we moved beneath the city. I sat near the door and let myself breathe. Then just before the doors closed at Bank Station, Adrian stepped inside. He carried a folded newspaper under one arm. No coat damp from rain. No surprise. He looked across the carriage and smiled. Ryan. My stomach dropped. Adrian. What a coincidence. Yes, I said. A coincidence. He sat opposite me, crossing one leg neatly over the other. Neither of us spoke for the next 2 stops. I looked at my reflection in the black window and saw him behind me, still smiling, faintly watching me, as though waiting for me to understand a joke I had not yet been told. When I got off, I did not look back. That night, I stood at my flat window for longer than I care to admit. Shoreditch glowed below in neon and rainwater full of strangers moving through their own private stories. I told myself no one had followed me. Then I saw him. Across the street beneath the entrance of the building opposite Adrian stood perfectly still. He was not checking his phone, not smoking, not waiting for a taxi. He was looking up, at my window. For several seconds neither of us moved. Then, slowly, Adrian lifted one hand. Not a wave exactly, more like an acknowledgement, a polite little gesture between 2 men who shared a secret. I stepped back so quickly I knocked over a glass on the windowsill. By the time I looked again, he was gone. That was the first night I locked my door twice, then a 3rd time. And even after that, I slept with the lights on. I did not tell anyone about seeing Adrian outside my flat. Not at first. There are certain fears that sound foolish once spoken aloud. They shrink under fluorescent lights and office chatter. They become coincidences, misunderstandings, little shadows made larger by exhaustion. I knew exactly how it would sound if I said it. Adrian was outside my building. Adrian knew which train I took. Adrian always appeared where I was. People would have smiled politely, then gently asked whether the pressure of the new job was getting to me, so I stayed quiet. The next morning, I arrived at the office with a headache behind my eyes, and the sour taste of sleeplessness in my mouth. London was wrapped in mist, the kind that made every tower seem unfinished, as though the upper floors disappeared into another world. Adrian was at his desk, of course. He looked up as I passed. "Morning, Ryan." His voice was as warm as ever. I forced myself to meet his eyes. Morning. There was no sign that he had stood beneath my window the night before. No guilt, no amusement, no secret flicker of triumph. That was perhaps the most disturbing thing about him. If Adrian wore a mask, it was not one he took off when he was alone. It was his face. For the next few days, I watched him more carefully. Not obviously. I was afraid of being obvious. But I began keeping a note on my phone recording times, and details like a man trying to convince himself he was still rational. Monday 8:12 a.m. Adrian already at desk. Monday 1:24 p.m. Adrian knew Sarah had changed meeting rooms before calendar updated. Tuesday 6:18 p.m. Adrian asked if I was taking the Central line, though I had told no one. Wednesday 9:05 a.m. Adrian told Mark from finance. Don't worry about the restructuring. No restructuring had been announced. The notes made me feel both better and worse. Better, because the unease was no longer floating shapelessly in my mind. Worse, because written down, it looked real. The first person to disappear was Emma. Emma worked in product strategy 2 rows away from me. She was sharp, restless, and funny in a way that sometimes made people nervous. She had a habit of asking questions others avoided, especially during all-hands meetings when senior leadership spoke too vaguely. I liked her immediately. She was one of the few people who did not seem hypnotized by Adrian. "He's charming," she told me once in the kitchen, while searching through the fridge for a yogurt she claimed someone had stolen. But so are estate agents and serial liars. I nearly laughed. "You don't like him." I didn't say that. She closed the fridge and looked toward the office where Adrian was helping an intern adjust a presentation. "I just don't trust people everyone agrees are wonderful." The sentence stayed with me. 2 days later, Emma was gone. No farewell email. No goodbye drinks. No awkward team announcement. Her desk was simply cleared before lunch, her monitor dark, her chair pushed in neatly as though she had never existed. When I asked Sophie from HR what had happened, she looked mildly surprised. "Oh," Emma resigned. "Resigned?" "Yes. Personal reasons, I think." "That doesn't sound like her." Sophie lowered her voice. "I know." It was sudden. Across the office, Adrian was arranging biscuits beside the coffee machine for someone's birthday. He looked completely at ease. Later that afternoon, I overheard two managers speaking near the stairwell. Did she give notice? No. HR received an email last night. Strange. Not our problem now. When I returned to my desk, Adrian was waiting beside it. "Emma leaving has unsettled you," he said. It was not a question. I just thought she would have said goodbye. Some people prefer clean endings. She didn't seem like one of those people. Adrian studied me for a moment, his expression soft with something that almost resembled pity. We rarely know people as well as we think we do. Then he smiled. "Coffee." I said no. His smile remained, but something behind his eyes cooled. The second disappearance came less than 2 weeks later. James worked in infrastructure. He was loud, broad-shouldered, and permanently surrounded by the smell of peppermint gum. He complained about everything: the lifts, the heating management, the coffee, London rent, tourists standing on the wrong side of escalators. But he loved the company. Everyone knew it. He had been there for 6 years, and spoke about the office as though it were a dysfunctional family he was too loyal to abandon. One Thursday evening, I found him smoking outside, beneath the glass canopy rain dripping from the edge above us. "You knew Emma, right?" I asked. James looked at me sharply. "Why?" She left, suddenly. He took a drag from his cigarette and glanced through the glass doors behind us. "She didn't leave." My throat tightened. "What do you mean?" "I mean, she was asking questions." "About what?" James hesitated. Then he shook his head. "Forget I said anything." He crushed the cigarette beneath his shoe and walked back inside. The next morning, James did not come to work. By Monday, his desk had been cleared. This time I went straight to Sophie. James resigned too. Her face was pale. "That's what I was told." "You were told." "Ryan." She looked over my shoulder. I turned. Adrian was standing near the end of the corridor speaking to a senior manager. He was not looking at us directly, but somehow I felt his attention settle over the conversation like a hand placed over a candle flame. Sophie lowered her voice. "Be careful." Then she walked away. Those 2 words changed everything. Because Sophie had always been sensible. She was not dramatic, not paranoid, not prone to office gossip. If she was frightened, then perhaps I was not alone inside my suspicion. That evening, instead of going home, I searched for Emma online. Her social media accounts had gone quiet. Her LinkedIn still listed the company as her current employer. No new job announcement. No goodbye post. Nothing. I searched for James next. His profile had vanished entirely. I found his old address through an archived delivery email he had once accidentally forwarded to our team. It was a flat in Camden, not far from the canal. I knew going there was absurd. I went anyway. The street was narrow and wet, lined with dark brick buildings, and bicycles chained to iron railings. A woman in the flat below his answered the bell after several tries. She wore a cardigan and looked annoyed until I mentioned James. "Moved out," she said. "No, haven't seen him." "When was the last time?" She thought for a moment. "Maybe last Thursday night. He came in late. I heard him arguing with someone in the hallway." "With who?" "Didn't see." She began closing the door, then paused. But whoever it was had a calm voice, very polite. That made it worse somehow. The cold that moved through me that had nothing to do with the weather. On the train back to Shoreditch, my phone buzzed. A message from an unknown number. "Stop looking." No name. No punctuation. Just those 2 words. For several seconds I could not breathe. Then another message appeared. People leave when they know too much. I looked around the carriage. Commuters stared at phones, read newspapers, leaned tired heads against windows. Nobody looked suspicious. Nobody looked at me. But reflected in the black glass opposite, I saw my own terrified face and remembered Adrian standing beneath my window, raising his hand like a gentleman greeting an old friend. By the time I reached my flat, I had received one final message. "If you really want the truth, go underground." Below it was an address. Not a street. Not a building. A location inside the office. Archive room B2. Basement level -2. I had never heard of it. and somehow that frightened me more than anything else. I spent the next 24 hours pretending I had not received the message. That was the only way I could function. I went to work. I answered emails. I sat through meetings in glass rooms where people spoke about launch dates and customer growth, while beneath every ordinary sentence, the words from my phone repeated again and again. If you really want the truth, go underground. Archive room B2. Basement level -2. By then, London had sunk into that bleak stretch between Christmas lights and winter despair. The streets were still decorated, still glowing with gold and silver, but the joy had drained out of them. Everything looked tired. Even the rain seemed exhausted. Inside the office, people moved around me as if nothing had changed. Sarah complained about the new design deadline. Thomas laughed too loudly near the coffee machine. Sophie avoided my eyes. And Adrian remained Adrian. Calm, elegant, beloved. He stood at the center of every conversation without ever seeming to demand it. People smiled when he approached. Their shoulders lowered, their voices softened. It was like watching a room surrender to him, one person at a time. I wondered how many of them he had files on. How many fears. How many weaknesses. How many private little wounds he had collected and stored somewhere beneath our feet. At lunch, he appeared beside my desk with 2 sandwiches from the cafe downstairs. Ham and mustard, he said, placing one in front of me. You liked it last week. I stared at the packet. I'm not hungry. You should eat. I said I'm not hungry. The words came out sharper than I intended. For the first time, a few people looked over. Adrian did not react. He simply lowered his hand, studied me for one quiet second, then gave a small apologetic smile. Of course. He walked away with perfect dignity. Immediately, guilt moved through me, ridiculous and unwanted. That was one of his talents. Even when you feared him, even when you knew something was wrong, Adrian could still make you feel cruel for refusing his kindness. Sophie messaged me 5 minutes later. Don't confront him here. I looked across the office. She was typing at her desk, face-pale eyes fixed on her screen. Another message appeared. If you go downstairs, don't go alone. My fingers froze over the keyboard. I typed back. You know about B2. For nearly a minute, nothing. Then, Emma found it first. My chest tightened. Then James. I looked toward Adrian's desk. He was speaking to one of the interns, smiling gently, adjusting the boy's tie before a client presentation. I typed, Are they alive? Sophie did not answer. That silence nearly broke me. By 6:30, the office began to empty. Outside rain swept against the glass walls and silver sheets, turning London into a blurred reflection of itself. Adrian left at precisely 7, coat folded over his arm, scarf neat at his throat. He passed my desk. Don't stay too late, Ryan. His voice was kind, almost tender. I won't. He paused, then smiled. Good. I waited 10 minutes after he entered the lift. Then I stood. Sophie was already near the emergency stairs, pretending to check something on her phone. She looked smaller than usual, swallowed by her long black coat. You shouldn't have come, she whispered. You told me not to go alone. I meant you should leave London. There was no drama in her voice. That made it worse. We took the service stairs down because Sophie said the lifts logged employee access after hours. The stairwell smelled of wet concrete and dust. With each floor, we descended. The sounds of the office faded until there was only the echo of our footsteps and the distant mechanical breathing of the building. Level -1 was the car park. Level -2 was different. Older. Colder. The corridor beyond the stairwell was lit by long fluorescent tubes, several of them flickering weakly. Pipes ran exposed along the ceiling. The walls were painted a tired, institutional gray, scratched in places, as though heavy objects had been dragged through years before. I thought this level was storage, I whispered. It is, Sophie said. Officially. She led me past archive shelves, locked supply cages, and a row of doors with faded labels. At the end of the corridor stood a metal door marked Archive Room B2. No keypad, no card reader, just an old-fashioned lock. Sophie took a key from her pocket. I stared at it. How do you have that? James gave it to me before he disappeared. The word disappeared hung between us. She unlocked the door. The room beyond was dark. When the light came on, I forgot how to breathe. Archive Room B2 was not an archive. It was a shrine to surveillance. Metal shelves lined every wall from floor to ceiling. Not filled with financial documents or old project reports, but with folders. Hundreds of them, each labeled with names. Employees, current and former. Some I recognized immediately. Sarah Whitmore, Thomas Bell, Emma Clark, James Hargreaves, Sophie Laurent, Ryan Hale. My own name stopped me like a hand around the throat. On the far wall, several old monitors were arranged across a desk connected to a maze of cables and small black recording devices. One screen showed the staff kitchen, another showed the 23rd floor corridor, another showed the rear exit I had used the day I tried to change my route home. The image was live. Sophie covered her mouth. "I didn't see this part before," she whispered. I walked toward my folder because I could not stop myself. It was thick, too thick for someone who had worked there less than a month. Inside were photographs. Me arriving on my first day. Me in the Italian cafe. Me entering the underground. Me standing at my flat window taken from the building opposite. My hand shook so violently the papers slipped from my grip and scattered across the floor. There were notes too. Precise handwritten observations. Prefers silence after criticism. Avoids confrontation. Responds to reassurance. Likely to isolate when afraid. Trust can be rebuilt through apology. I felt sick. Not because the notes were cruel. Because they were accurate. Adrian had not merely watched me. He had studied me. Sophie opened Emma's file with trembling hands. Her face changed as she read. "What is it?" I asked. Sophie swallowed. He had emails, private ones, things from her personal account. How? I don't know. She turned another page, then another. Her voice broke. He used them against her. Emma had been planning to report Adrian. In the file were printed messages, photographs of her meeting with building security, even notes about her younger brother's debt. There was a final page typed rather than handwritten. Subject agreed to resign voluntarily. No further escalation expected. Sophie moved to James's file next. The same pattern. Questions. Evidence. Pressure. Then disappearance. Not death. Not kidnapping. Something colder in its own way. Erasure. They had been cornered with secrets, debts, old mistakes, family vulnerabilities, private messages dragged into the light and sharpened into weapons. Adrian had not needed to touch them. He had simply known enough to make their lives collapse quietly. That was his true power. Not violence. Knowledge. Control. A soft voice in a locked room. We were still reading when the monitors flickered. One by one, the live camera feeds changed. The kitchen vanished. The corridor vanished. The rear exit vanished. Every screen went black. Then, white text appeared across all of them. "Hello, Ryan." Sophie made a small sound beside me. The door clicked shut behind us. I turned slowly. Adrian stood inside the room. He was not holding a weapon. He did not need one. He wore his charcoal coat, his scarf, his polished shoes, his expression of gentle disappointment. Rain glistened faintly on his shoulders, as though he had returned from the city, just in time for an appointment he had never truly forgotten. "Sophie," he said softly. "I'm disappointed." She stepped back. "How long have you known?" I asked, though my voice hardly sounded like mine. Adrian looked at me with something almost like affection. "Known what?" "That we were coming." He smiled. "Ryan, I know what people do before they do it. That has always been the point." The room seemed to tilt around me. "You destroyed Emma and James. I gave them choices. You blackmailed them. I protected the company." "No," Sophie whispered. "You protected yourself." For the first time, Adrian's eyes moved to her with genuine coldness. "Myself," he said. "You think this is about vanity?" He gestured around the room. "This place functions because I understand people. Because I see the cracks before they become fractures. I know who is unhappy, who is disloyal, who is reckless, who will poison a team before anyone else notices. You spy on them," I said. "I listen. You stalk them. I care." The word was spoken so sincerely that it disturbed me more than any threat could have. Adrian stepped closer. "People are careless with their lives. They leave pieces of themselves everywhere. Their fears, their habits, their secrets. I simply collect what they abandon and use it to ruin them, to guide them away when they become dangerous." I laughed then, not because anything was funny, but because terror sometimes exits the body wearing the wrong mask. "You really believe you're a gentleman?" Adrian's expression softened. "I am the reason this place has not collapsed under the weight of its own weakness." At that moment, Sophie moved. She threw one of the heavy folders at his face. It struck his shoulder, not hard enough to hurt him, but enough to break the spell. "Run," she shouted. I grabbed the nearest recording device from the desk and tore it free. Cables snapped. Sparks jumped from one monitor. Adrian lunged toward me, but Sophie shoved a shelf between us. Folders spilled everywhere, hundreds of names falling like dead leaves. We ran for the door. It was locked. Sophie slammed her shoulder against it, cursing under her breath. Behind us, Adrian was rising calmly, brushing papers from his coat. "You're making a mistake," he said. "No," I said, pulling out my phone. "You did." His smile faded for the first time. Before going downstairs, I had done the only sensible thing fear allowed me to do. I had sent the anonymous message, the address, and a scheduled email to Malcolm from building security set to deliver if I did not cancel it within 20 minutes. The message had gone out 5 minutes ago. Above us, faint at first, then louder came the sound of footsteps in the corridor. Security. More than one person. Adrian heard them too. For one brief second, the mask slipped. Not much. Just enough. His face emptied. The warmth vanished. The kindness. The old-world charm. The gentleman disappeared, and what remained was a man standing in a room full of stolen lives, furious that anyone had dared to look behind the curtain. Then the door opened. Malcolm entered first, followed by 2 security officers and Sophie's manager. Nobody spoke at first. They only looked. At the monitors. At the files. At Adrian. By morning, police were involved. By afternoon, senior leadership had locked down the entire floor. By evening, Adrian's name had vanished from the company directory, though nobody called it an arrest in public. Companies prefer clean language. Internal investigation. Data misuse. Breach of conduct. But Sophie and I knew what we had seen. 3 months later, I left the company. So did Sophie. Emma contacted me once from a private email. She was alive. So was James. Neither wanted to talk about what Adrian had taken from them. I understood. Some damage does not need bruises. Some violence never raises its voice. I moved to another firm near Street Paul's and tried to begin again. On my first morning, I arrived early. The office was smaller, warmer, less polished. I told myself that was good. Safer. A young man from operations greeted me at reception with a bright smile and handed me a coffee. Flat white, he said. No sugar. The cup remained untouched in my hand. "I'm sorry," I said carefully. "How did you know?" His smile widened. "Oh," he said. "Someone recommended you." He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a folded note. He handed it to me politely, then walked away. I opened it with cold fingers. There were only 4 words written in neat, familiar handwriting. "The gentleman remembers you.